My name's Philip Hayes with the Arnold Group, and also I serve as the chairman for the Employment Security Review Board for the Kansas Department of Labor for the appeals process regarding unemployment claims statewide. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to visit with chamber members, small businesses throughout the state regarding what I would say a little known or less publicized program that's available for businesses to participate in, and called the Work Share program or the Shared Work program through the Kansas Department of Labor. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview, kind of my journey with it in past years, as well as how we're utilizing it this year as well. So just to kind of set the stage, in the economic downturn from 2008, we had stumbled across looking for different solutions on how we could help protect jobs and protect the bottom line at the same time. Came across a program called the Shared Work program, investigated a little bit more, and ultimately applied through the Kansas Department of Labor. Got approval on that at that time frame. The program gave us a 1 year or 52-week approval process plan, and we had utilized that for, at that time I would say we had about 25 regular internal employees, internal full-time staff employees, and went through the Work Share program where we offset our work hours and did partial unemployment pay. We were all a little bit nervous and apprehensive. Our employees were concerned about it. It was something new. Ended up doing that once we got the approval and got everybody uploaded and managed the claim process for all of our employees. A lot of the feedback that we ended up getting back from our employee population was very positive. A lot of employees at that time were worried about a pay cut, but at the same time very appreciative of us maintaining and keeping their jobs. There was, with the partial unemployment, they received a slight decrease in pay when you combine the work hours as well as the shared work partial unemployment. And at that time, there's a $25 weekly boost at different segments of that time frame. We actually applied all through and actually utilized throughout the calendar year 2009. We reapplied for 2010, went through the program pretty much for the balance of the calendar year then, and then reapplied for a third consecutive program year at the beginning of 2011, and had very limited usage at the first couple of months of 2011. So the program really worked. We found it to be a great benefit to kind of help offset and manage the slowdown as well as the slower uptick in the economy. So it allowed us to balance our workforce against the needs of the business and customer responses and customer service levels that we needed to do. So today I'm just going to kind of overview the Kansas Shared Work program. I will take questions as they come up. If anybody has questions, throw them out on the chat, and they'll be presented from one of the chamber representatives, and I will answer those as we go. So I'll watch for those to come up, or if Marcy or Chelsea, if you want to throw those questions out as we're going through the material, that way we're not backtracking as we go. So the Kansas Work Shared program essentially is a short-term compensation plan that is outlined and authorized by the U.S. Department of Labor. Every state has the option to do one, put one in place. Kansas has had its program in place since April of 1989. So they've had it around for a long time. Again, if you're not familiar with it, it just goes to the point that I don't know that it's as widely publicized or communicated as a great alternative in challenging times like this. So essentially, this program is, if you're facing a layoff or furlough decisions, this provides another alternative in your discussions within your organization. Through this program, employers can reduce the hours of their regular full-time or part-time employees, who can then collect partial unemployment benefits to replace a portion of their lost wages. The beauty about this program right now, under the CARES Act, the feds authorized $100 million to any state that has an existing work share program. So that's going to afford some protection and insulation for the state. for this for the state of Kansas to maintain or at least offset the trust fund balance and the declines that we're going to see over the coming months with that, which ultimately is going to impact every rated employer and their rates moving forward for the next couple of years would be my prediction. So definitely a side benefit in the current system or the current year with COVID-19 pandemic. So normally rated employers would have to pay benefits back to the state for their laid off employees, for anybody that's collecting those benefits. But this is going to give you a break because instead of taking a full hit on your unemployment or your SUTA account, you're going to maintain higher levels of employment, but then just cut maybe your payrolls in a different manner. So for the Arnold Group this year, or this program year, we have about 33 regular full-time employees, and we had a couple options because as our business was impacted just like everybody else was, we looked at, do we consider layoffs? Do we look at work share again? And work share was such a wild success for us last time. We immediately went back to that. And just with 33 employees, and when we run our calculated savings, 33 employees through this program year, it's going to save us about $154,000. So the savings are real. So if you're a larger organization than us, you can magnify those savings. Or if you're a smaller organization, I've worked with organizations that have as few as 3 employees, and they're projecting a minimum of a $12,000 savings. So it's certainly going to kind of shift some of your payroll expense downstream, but it allows you to preserve those jobs, the continuity, your training investment, your tenured staff. And I think ultimately it's a nice communication, loyalty message back to your staff that if you can prevent full layoffs, this gives you that alternative and a mechanism to do so. So I have, obviously we're all familiar with the unemployment insurance system and the challenges that are currently going on with the old technology and the phone system. I look at this as a means to not only save payroll dollars and save your staff and save those jobs, but it allows you to actually manage the process for those impacted. So they're not going to get in lines with the unemployment system. This is going to be an administrative duty that the HR department or a designated rep within your organization will carry the mantle to report on a weekly basis the shared work and the number of hours worked for each claimant. So the impact on your workforce is relatively minimal. So they're not filing weekly claims, etc. But their job is insulated. They're going to receive partial pay. And one of the other benefits right now, from March 29th through July 25th, the federal weekly boost, $600 weekly benefit addition is essentially going to help offset any employees that may have had or would have been impacted with a reduction in their pay just through the traditional work-share program. So we're going to go through some calculations and kind of what that looks like for an average employee that may be on your workforce. But when I think about the unemployment insurance, I look at the work-share program as an offset and really look at it as employment insurance. So it's kind of just reprogramming your mind on how you look at this or how you utilize the SUTA tax dollars that you've committed through the years. So by and large, the majority of all rated employers in the state of Kansas, as well as all reimbursing employers in the state of Kansas, are eligible to participate in the work-share program. So it's truly a win-win-win for the employers. It offsets some immediate economic relief. It's a win for your employees because it minimizes the economic concerns or uncertainty or frustrations. And then ultimately for the Kansas communities that we're all serving, it keeps employees attached to the local labor market as well, with a lot more certainty. So at this point, I'm going to stop. I see a chat bubble if there's a question that has come up before we jump into some of the kind of the dollars and cents. The question is the work-share program available to employers of all sizes? And technically, Yes, whether you have one employee or 1,000 employees in your workforce, it is available. Some of the underlying components of the program is you have to designate or define a defined work unit, and that's open to interpretation for any organization. So for a city, you could do a senior services center as a designated work unit. You could do corrections or law enforcement, or for a private business. I'm going to take the Arnold Group, for example. We have 6 locations throughout South Central Kansas. We elected to do 6 applications, one for each brick and mortar community that we operate in. However, our Wichita office houses our corporate staff as well. So we could have defined 2 units in Wichita. One is our operational staff, and then we could have done corporate or administrative, or we could have even drilled down further and did sales, and then a marketing unit and a payroll unit, and so forth. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you define your work units. Just understand that the more work units that you define, it's just a little bit more administrative work and more units to manage and process on a weekly basis. So beyond having a positive balance, each work unit that you define, a minimum of 10% of that workforce population has to be included in the workforce reductions on any week that is participating. So 10% of your workforce in the defined work unit. And the other requirement is you can do no less than a 20% reduction and no more than a 40% reduction. So if everybody were to actually just Google KDOL or Kansas Department of Labor, if you go to their homepage, in the lower left of the 6 blue boxes, click on the Employer Apply for Shared Work program, and that'll outline some of the information that I'm going to cover as well. But this gets into who's eligible, defining the work unit, etc. So hopefully that was helpful. We're going to dig into a little bit more of that as we go through. I do want to just kind of hit on the dollars and cents and how it impacts maybe an average worker on your payroll. And I'm just going to take, regardless of title, but a $15 an hour employee working 40 hours a week. If you do the math, it's $600 gross wages. This equates to $120 per day if you did it on a 40-hour work week or a 5-day schedule. If we take that same $15 an hour employee and we apply for the work share program, we get approved, go through the process, and we do a 20% reduction for that employee, now they are at every employee is going to calculate what their weekly benefit amount is under the laws and the statute within the state of Kansas and the formula that's there. Essentially, it is 60% of their gross earnings in the previous 12 months or 4 calendar quarters that were reported. So if that $15 an hour employee didn't have part-time employment elsewhere, and they were at $15 last year, 15, 20, 80, be $31,200 gross wages. So the math on that, you take 31,200 times 60%, we end up with 18,720. Divide that by 52 weeks. That weekly benefit would be $360 a week for their weekly benefit amount. If somebody is maximized and they're qualified for the full weekly benefit amount, which in Kansas right now, that dollar amount is $488 a week. The minimum is 25% of that, or $122 a week. So for the math that I had worked up for this, it was, I looked at somebody that was qualified on the full weekly benefit amount. So if that's $488 times 20% for the 20% work share reduction, they're looking at $97.60 for a 1-day work share or 20% reduction in hours. So that's another question, is you don't have to do full day cuts. You can cut 8 hours or 20% of the hours across an entire work week. It doesn't have to be full blocks of time. Although I would caution for exempt level or salaried employees, you would do full day cuts just to preserve your exempt level, your exempt status. So we take the $97.60 for the 20% reduction on the maximum weekly benefit amount. and you add that to the $15 an hour times the 32 hours that they would still be working that week, which would be $480 in gross wages. Add those two together, they're at $577.60. That compared to the standard $600 gross wage is a slight decrease, but then when you put that $600 boost on for the next 13 weeks, that employee is actually going to be earning more than they would have been had they stayed gainfully employed for the full-time hours that they were traditionally working. If you do a 40% reduction, you do the same math, it's just multiplied by 40% rather than the 20. So their partial unemployment would be $195.20 if they're achieving the maximum weekly benefit amount. You take that $195.20 plus their earned wages at 24 hours that week of $360. That would put them at roughly $555 gross earnings for the week. So there's definitely some math to do, and I wish there was just a clear, easy formula to do that. We have put into some estimating calculators where you can load employees' wages, but what we don't know as an employer is if somebody has a part-time work or a side hustle and they've got additional earnings that you're unaware of, their weekly benefit amount could be different than what you're projecting potentially for them. So with that, I'm just going to kind of walk through the formula again to calculate the daily work share amount. We use the 2019 total gross wages divided by 52 weeks, multiplied by 60% to get the statutory weekly benefit amount. And then we divide that by 5 days in a work week. And that would equate to your daily work share amount for that individual. Now, again, that's if we're calculating off gross wages that we know about versus what their full financial picture looks like. So questions on the numbers at this point? Okay, I did mention we had developed a Microsoft Excel estimated payroll savings calculator where you can load your employees in. So if you have a data dump that you can grab from your payroll system, you can load your employees in, look at their hourly rates. Again, it's kind of a best case guess because we don't know what the other wages that those employees may have had outside of our employment. The calculator that we have will annotate or estimate savings, whether you go through 10 weeks or up to the 26 weeks or 26 occurrences that you can use in your 52-week program year. See a chat here. Kind of a high-level overview of the shared work program is you submit your application. So if you did go to the URL on KDUL's website, you would click on the blue link at the top of the shared work program. You'll click on the shared work plan application. That will bring up your application that you're going to define for each designated work unit on how you want to segment your workforce up. With that, you're going to submit your basic employer information, the affected unit, and so whatever name you put here, they're going to attach a sequence number in addition to the program unit that you define as well. You'll identify number of employees in the unit, number of hours, or number of employees whose hours would be reduced under the plan. That's where they're trying to get the 10% minimum participation for each work unit. And then what's the normal hours and what's the reduction that you expect to use. One thing that, one of the common questions I get on the front end is, do we just have to pick the people that we want to put on WorkShare now, or when we send in our application, should we do all of our departmental employees or work unit employees, or just those that we think are going to be impacted by this? And my personal opinion is because you can add employees later, but why add that step? If I'm going to load employees' information on the front end of this, I'm going to include everybody that's in the affected work unit. That does not mean that I have to utilize the WorkShare program immediately. It preserves the right that they're included in my program year that is going to be approved, and I have 52 weeks to ebb and flow or be flexible with how I'm going to have people on or off of the work share weeks throughout the next 52 weeks. It's important to note that each employee can only have 26 occurrences, which is tied to our traditional unemployment system. So somebody is approved for traditional benefits, they have 26 qualified weeks. That number corresponds and translates over to the work share program. And so we, as the Arnold Group, we are using a 40% reduction model. When we started March 23rd, our initial plan was let's get to the stay-at-home order through April 19th. That's been extended through May 4th now. So what we anticipated being 4 weeks has turned into 6 weeks on the 40% reduction. Once the stay-at-home order is lifted, as business comes back and we ebb more upward, we can either just go off work share altogether. We could do a 20% reduction. We could do a mixed match. I know 2 weeks ago we had an employee that worked 40 hours for us based on the demand and the client requirements or the workload. We had some employees, the majority of our employees do the 40%. And then we had one employee do a 20% in that same week. So you have a lot of flexibility built into this program to have this mirror the demands of your business or your organizational requirements and responding to your customers or your workload as the situation continues to change, which it seems like that's been the one constant in this whole deal is the change on a daily and almost hourly pace. So once the application is submitted, you'll sign and date that. You'll certify that this is your intent, you understand the system or the program. You're going to submit that for approval. The Kansas Department of Labor has a designated unit for the workshare program. And what that means is from the employer community, since we're doing some of the administrative work for them, they have a dedicated team to assist us through this process, whether it's on the front end and getting everything set up, or if we have questions or situations arise, we get a designated channel where there's less burden on that program rather than the general unemployment system. So that's been nice. I'll just call Sharon out by name. She's been wonderful to work with from the department. She has certainly got her hands full, but she's really been responsive and has been extremely helpful for us and the other employers that we've assisted in this process as well. So the approval process takes on average 1 to 3 days. So I've heard some people submit their application one morning and get approved same day. I've had colleagues that applied on a Friday and got their approval on a Saturday. So I know the extended hours they are working extra, and honestly, DOL would love to have more employers go the work share route just because it does keep more employees attached to the workforce. It gives us the alternative, gives us some flexibility from the employers community. But once that approval process comes back, whether it's same days or up to 3 days later, you'll receive an email back with a couple of flyers. Those flyers are on that workshare program. If you clicked on that and go to the very bottom, this gives you some informational flyers for employers, and there's also one for employees. You'll get these flyers back with the approval message. There'll be a few highlights on some of these things. We want to make sure that we're communicating to our employees and what those parameters and requirements are. The biggest thing, and for your employees to help you be successful with this program, is they need to report any additional work hours that they have outside of your employment. So if somebody has a second job or a part-time job elsewhere and you do a 40% reduction, you take them from 40 to 24 hours, and they're working part-time for 10 hours elsewhere, the state wants to know that. So you're going to report 24 hours that you paid them for, plus the 10 hours that your employee reported that they worked elsewhere and received payment for. And what that is helping them with their formula. So they're going to load that this employee had 36 work hours for the previous week. They would be qualified for 4 hours of partial unemployment. So it's a matter of keeping employees whole. The only downside to this is if an employee would qualify for a higher a weekly benefit amount, then the 488, they just get reduced to the $488. If somebody has severance or vacation or paid PTO out during a given week, and those are paid hours, if their earnings are greater than the maximum weekly benefit, then they would not be eligible that week. So if somebody does have a retirement, a pension, a capers, some sort of reportable income to the Department of Labor, that will influence their benefit amount and how that goes through. Apologize, I got off track there for a minute. Once you receive that application with the employee or the flyers, you'll also get a weekly certification report, and this will become the template that you will use administratively every Monday to report the listing of your employees with socials and their names, work hours for you, work hours outside of your employment, and you'll print that off, sign it, scan it in, email it to the Workshare group, and that is your certification that those hours are accurate and truthful to the best of your knowledge. And that's what will kick the weekly calculations for each of your employees that had reduced hours. Now, if somebody didn't have reduced hours, you would just simply put that they were paid 40 hours for the previous week, and they would not be impacted, and they wouldn't have an occurrence, one of their 26 occurrences to the 52-week program year. From the employee's perspective, once your applications are approved, that should indicate that anybody that was submitted initially would be loaded into DOL's website or their database. It's going to generate a monetary determination letter to them, as well as a second letter that they'll receive outlining the pay card provisions on how they load and pay unemployment benefits. The DOL utilizes a pay card through Bank of America as the default pay mechanism. However, once you're approved, we encourage employees to go to the Get Benefits, getkansasbenefits.gov. At that point, they can click on one of the links that says Start Now or Apply for Benefits, and what they need to do is, although they're not really applying for benefits, they need to create their account. So if they clicked on, or you inform them to file for unemployment benefits, they can click the create icon and create a username. It'll want a email address, their social security number, and I believe their birth date on the front end. Once they have their account set up, they can log in and go to the payment options and change from the default pay card option to a direct deposit option. The benefit with that is if somebody stays on the pay card option, it's going to delay their first funds another 7 to 10 days, because the card is not loaded until the first fund is, or until the first payment is funded. They kick that over to the bank, the card is generated, and the card is mailed out, and then you're at the mercy of the U.S. Postal Service. So we highly recommend that all of our employees change to direct deposit, and that minimized the potential delay. I will say strategically, we looked at our pay periods and elected for a March 23rd start date because that was the beginning of the pay period, but it also allowed us to complete the existing pay period in which we were going to have our employees receive another full paycheck based on the closing of that pay period. And with the messaging and the communication, they could start planning from a financial or budgetary standpoint for that impact. Some of the questions come back to is how long does it take for the benefits to kick in? If anybody's been following DOL, they've been challenged with the older technology and some of the new provisions with this. The Workshare seems to streamline this process. I don't want to overpromise and say that benefits will be seamless from the first week, but once you get past that initial application approval, uploading the layoff spreadsheet, following the directions from the instructions outlined in the next steps letter from the Workshare group. Once everything is loaded, there may be a week delay on that first one. And that's why we strategically chose to get through completing a full pay period. That way our employees had ample time to prepare The good news is if there is a delay, all benefits will be retroed. So I think what threw a kink in this early for some of the early adopters on whether it's unemployment or work share is the waiting week was waived right just before the legislature adjourned early this session. So there were some coding changes. All those have been put into place at this point. It's my understanding and reading some of the news articles that the $600 boost, even though it was supposed to start March 29th, is actually that those first payments, those first checks will be sent out as early as tomorrow, is what I'm reading. Even though those are the first ones, there's still some trailing weeks that they're going to be playing catch up. So those once those start coming in, those will be retro paid if there is a delay for a week on participants that are pursuing benefits through this program or traditional UI. So my last, I mentioned the layoff spreadsheet. The WorkShare program utilizes the mass layoff spreadsheet, the one that is also on KDOL's website. The only difference is there's some additional language and instruction in the approval letter that you receive back as far as what number or designations you use on that WorkShare or the shared work, the mass layoff spreadsheet. And so there's specific codes that get uploaded into that, and they give you that information once you've been approved. So you follow that instruction. How you upload that document is logging into your employer portal through DOL's website, and they give you additional instructions on how to answer. I think there's 7 to 9 questions in there. Probably the most confusing one is where it says, is this a temporary layoff? Logically, I'd like to say yes, it's temporary because it's WorkShare and that's the nature of the program. However, they want us to answer no. So it seems like it's opposite of what it should be. But again, I would just follow the guidance and the direction from that letter. So I see we have a couple of comments that have come in. If a company had already laid off or furloughed employees, can they transition to WorkShare program? So I'm not sure if my audio got cut off there, so I'll restate the question. If somebody already laid off or furloughed some employees, can you still participate in WorkShare now? And the answer is yes. If you furloughed employees, you can let that run its course. Bring employees back. You can still load them in your application process to be included and transition them onto that. The other question that I've come up that's been presented is, can you furlough some, can you lay off some, and can you do WorkShare? So different businesses have different needs, and how they respond to those are going to vary greatly, but you have the flexibility to really have all three in play at one time, is the language or the response that I got back from DOL. Has DOL actually started paying the $600 as well? I'd heard that part is being delayed. So the question, has the $600 boost already started? Short answer is no. The reports that I had seen in the news sources is, in talking to DOL in the last weeks, they kept saying it's coming soon. And I think it was KWCH had reported that Wednesday, April 22nd, is the day that those first payments are expected to be made. So, and there will be some catch-up provisions to get those trailing weeks that for people that were qualified for it, they'll actually get that boost for those missed weeks as well. Great question. Are employees required to use PTO or accrued time off benefits before WorkShare? And really the short answer to this is whatever your policies are. If you're not making policy changes, I'll use the Arnold Group, for example. For FMLA, we do require the use of accrued and unused paid time off for that. However, this isn't designated as FMLA in a lot of respects. So we thought about the value proposition on the back end. When business comes back, our employees are still going to have life that happens. And interestingly, there may be additional wrinkles as we continue to move forward through the rest of this year, that we didn't require them to burn PTO on the front end. So And honestly, that would have been a little bit more capital outlay had we requested that on the front end. We've been paying that. It would have minimized participation in the work share and ultimately the benefit that we're trying to get. So we're being helped out on the front end, and we didn't necessarily want to penalize our employees and force that time off before using work share, because we're still going to have life's daily and weekly and monthly challenges, and the flu season next year, and vacations and personal time off. So right now with the work share program, people are getting extra time off. So I know personally I've completed a few honeydews off the list, and that's been nice. I would say I'm not having to burn time off, but with the 40% reduction, the employees are paying for it one way or the other. The piece from the scheduling point too, when I talked about going through our pay period, that defined or allowed us time to define our modified work schedules and to make sure we had coverage and to ensure that we had managerial or management coverage across the board. By and large, we asked for kind of volunteer and within work groups, and with one guiding principle that we needed to make sure that we had coverage during our traditional business hours. But most of our employees opted for a 4-day weekend in some respects. So some are off Thursdays and Fridays, some are off Mondays and Tuesdays, some are off Fridays and Mondays. But we also have a handful of people that it just made sense for them, and that they're working half days pretty much 5 days a week. So you have a lot of flexibility. We're just trying to be mindful and balancing that with the employees didn't necessarily sign up for this. One of the communication streams that we've been pushing out too is job protection was our number one priority. So although we are essentially mandating the participation in the workshare program, nobody necessarily wanted a salary cut, but this is a short-term deal, and all of our employees were on board that they'd rather preserve the jobs in the tag team as we move forward, and hopefully we persevere and come out of this hole in the same manner that we got into this program. So that was our experience in 2009 when we jumped into the program, and it carried us a little over 2 years, and we came out on the back end maintaining our tag family and our training investment. So we've got employees that were with us back then that have been great mentors for some of our newer employees, that this is their first downturn that they're going through. And that certainly provided a lot of relief and assurance to those newer employees to know that this is not our first foray with it. And we've done it before. It's been a great tool for us, and actually our employees enjoyed certain aspects of it. They made the most of it as they could. So I talked about kind of the links on DOL, the flyers that are at the bottom of the page. The best thing I can recommend to anybody is, if you're not entirely sure if this makes sense for you, you could at least submit your application, get approval. Just because you get approval doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put anybody on reduced hours, but it puts you, it sets you up that if and when the decision, and if anything changes between now and 3 weeks, or who knows, you'll at least have it kind of on standby in your hip pocket, that if you needed to do this, it's going to be there for you, rather than starting that process when the true need hits. So I know in visiting with a lot of businesses, the need presented itself very fast, and I think most people are probably past that. But if you're just not sure, you have questions, you can submit the application process. That puts you in touch with the Workshare reps at DOL. And if you have specific questions, you can certainly reach back out to myself. At that point, though, you'd have a lifeline to the Workshare group as well. The one thing I have been working with DOL and the communications team is we're trying to get some additional resources, and there's a lot of tutorials and videos that they have, but this is one area that we're trying to button up and outline the process and answer some of these questions a little bit more. So we hope to have some additional resources coming soon, and once those are published, then I'll certainly share those with the contacts and with the Hutch Chamber, and they can roll those out as well. So watch for that. I know a couple of questions that came up not only in-house for us, I've had it come from other employers, and it actually came up prior to this call starting, is as an employer, if we did get into a layoff and business essentially came to a screeching halt, and now things are starting to thaw a little bit and business is coming back, we're calling our employees back and we have work available. We've had firsthand experience that employees are saying, no, I think I'm just going to sit tight. I really don't want to mess up my unemployment benefits. And that's a very challenging and very real situation that's occurring and starting to really see an increase of that. And we confirmed with Kansas Department of Labor last Monday what they were doing from a fraud protection or a fraud enforcement provision, and they indicated that it's business as usual. They will pursue fraud, and how they define fraud, there's only one component that they actually took off the table right now for the emergency response under COVID, is those claimants do not necessarily have to actively be searching for work, but the components that are still in play for fraud are somebody's collecting unemployment while refusing suitable work and they're failing to report that they refused work. They're also working and not reporting correct earnings. They're operating their own business, or they're knowingly misrepresenting that they're able and available for work. So the able and available and willing, that's always kind of been the three-legged stool for this. If somebody's able and available, but yet they're not willing, that would constitute fraud. Now, the question comes back to what do we do from an employer group, from a business community standpoint? And on our website, we posted it on LinkedIn, our Facebook, it's under our COVID updates, under the Arnold Group. If you go to our homepage and click on the COVID banner under the primary banner, then the table of contents up top under economic relief, unemployment insurance, it will outline, there's a printable fraud form you can submit, there's an electronic fraud form you can submit, a job refusal statement by the employer, and it provides email as well as phone, fax, or snail mail address that you can report job refusals to. The tough thing with the job refusals is the penalties add up pretty quick, because if it's investigated and determined that somebody committed fraud or didn't accept the callback opportunity, they could be disqualified for unemployment benefits for 5 years. Any benefits received would be constituted as an overpayment, and there would also be a 25% penalty on top of that. So when we have employees that we're calling back indicate that they would rather just sit tight and not mess their unemployment up, we're just simply telling them that we're obligated to report job refusals to the Department of Labor, and an investigation will be pursued at that point. So that's our response on it. We collected these fraud forms just in one central location. There's a couple different avenues or sites or URL pages for DOL. We just put them all on one with that. So it seems I have a question here. What if, okay, so kind of a caveat off of the last discussion, if an employee says, I'm scared to come back to the work, you're calling me back, but I'm scared based on COVID concerns. And this is another one on our COVID updates page. We're trying to hit this with current information, but there's guidance that the CDC has offered to employers for exposed workers. And when we fast forward and we get to May 4th, when hopefully the Kansas stay-at-home order is lifted and more employees are reintegrating back into the workforce, I think the CDC guidance will be broadened out to not just exposed workers, but to not just essential workers, but reintegrating workers. So how Kansas Department of Labor responded to this question is, if an employer is utilizing the guidance that's being issued, so you're pre-screening your employees, are you looking at temperatures, assessing symptoms prior to employees entering the facility and starting work? Are you regularly monitoring employees? Are you asking your employees to self-monitor and report that? CDC says wear a mask, and the tough thing is the N95 masks, there's a shortage of them, and from the employer standpoint, we didn't necessarily have a need at that point to have this huge stock of masks, and now we can't get them. But CDC says that an employer can approve an employee supplied cloth face covering in the event of a shortage of masks. So there's options there as well. Social distancing. Basically, if you're doing the steps and the advised steps from CDC and the local health departments, that's what would be investigated from a Department of Labor fraud investigator to say, okay, this employee refused to come back because they said that the employer wasn't doing enough to protect their safety. But if you're pre-screening, you're monitoring your employees and having them do self-monitoring, you're authorizing self-supplied cloth masks or facial coverings, you're enforcing social distancing, and you're disinfecting and cleaning workspaces, DOL will pursue that as fraud because the employer has done all the appropriate measures that are being recommended as we continue to evolve through this process. So other questions?
I unmuted myself, Phil. This is Marcy with the Chamber, and I just want to thank everybody for being on this call, and thank you so much for your expertise. And want to put it out there for anybody to, if they have questions, to throw them out there.
I know I'm not that good. There's got to be some questions out there. I will say as you kind of go through this information, or you get involved in the process and you have questions along the way, I've made myself available just because we've gone through this, and the Arnold Group is in the business of jobs. That's what we do, is staffing and recruiting. And at the end of the day, this is something that we felt strongly about. If we can help existing clients or just the Kansas business community as a whole and preserve some jobs. I mean, there's been enough job loss, and not sure what the future holds, that if we can help preserve some jobs and keep employees attached to the labor force, that's good for our communities. That's good for the mental and the financial well-being of our employees. And from the business community, it's good for employers because it retains your training investment. And we all know the challenges of recruiting in the environment before this hit, and we'll see where this goes. But training is certainly no fun. If we can preserve that and find a path to keep our employees close to whole and give them a little bit more certainty during these challenging times, I'm certainly glad to help. So I would offer anybody that wants to reach out to me with a specific question. I've pushed out my cell phone throughout this process. I'm at the Arnold Group. My contact information is pretty easy to find online. You can go to the Hutch Chamber there, and they'll put you in contact with me as well. So I don't see any other questions unless one has evolved since.
I don't see any questions either.
Well, I appreciate everybody's time and joining us. And like I said, the invitation's there if any additional specific questions come up.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
we
so appreciate you. So appreciate you taking the time, and definitely your firsthand knowledge only makes you even more of an expert.